Tommy with Elevation every weekend. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video I'm going to do a review on the Manitou Mastodon Pro suspension fork for fat bikes. Borealis Fat Bikes has provided me the carbon crestone you've been seeing on the channel recently and in this video. They also gave me use of this Mastodon Pro suspension fork to put to the test. But before I get to some detailed specs and some ride impressions of the fork, I did want to take some time to explain a little bit my personal bias regarding suspension on fat bikes. As someone who owns and ride multiple hardtail 29ers and has owned and ridden extensively full suspension mountain bikes, I definitely have extensive experience with suspension with mountain biking. One of the initial things and things that continued to attract me to fat bikes was the simplicity of a rigid fat bike design, yet still maintaining a good amount of traction, comfort, and active suspension in the high volume tire of fat bikes. Tires play an important part of every bike's suspension scenario, even full suspension mountain bikes. However, I am acutely aware even the high volume tires of a fat bike can't fully replicate what a suspension can do, especially when you factor in the dynamics of adjustable rebound and other tunable aspects of shock design. But for a large portion of the riding I do, fat bike tires actually do a great job by themselves. So, has riding this Mastodon Pro fork changed my mind on utilizing suspension on my fat bikes? So let's get to the review. So let's get started with some specs of the Mastodon Pro fork. From Manitou, the Mastodon Pro has an MSRP of $950, and the fork has options to run from 26 by 4 inch tire size all the way up to 27.5 by 4.5. And this does vary depending on if you use the regular or the extended variant of the fork. It is designed for all temperature performance, important for fat bike use. The weight is stated at 2,172 grams for the extended, which is what I'm running. My actual observed weight for the fork I have on hand with the axle installed was just over 5 pounds, or 2,277 grams. This is almost exactly 3 pounds heavier than the full carbon Borealis rigid fork that it replaced on the bike. Also of note, there's a cheaper comp version of the Mastodon fork. It's $200 cheaper, but weighs 200 grams more. This fork has multiple travel options from 100, 200 up to 150 millimeters of travel, and the 100 millimeter and 120 millimeter variants are adjustable in 10 millimeter increments. Mine as tested was at 120 millimeters of travel, which I really do feel is the sweet spot. Some other basic features are 34 millimeter stanchions, and the adjustments include air volume, rebound, and 3-position compression, open, trail, and lockout. As for the installation and setup, my setup was actually super easy as Borealis already prepped the fork for my bike, so I didn't have to trim the head tube or anything like that. Otherwise, the process is very straightforward to swap the fork over onto the crestone. After that, it was just a case of me getting my air pressure in the sag set for the fork, which did require a fork pump, and then I just experimented with and tweaked the other adjustments a bit until it felt good. And since then, it's been set and forget. My rides for this review were focused exclusively on running fat tires on the bike, but I will be mounting up a set of 29 plus wheels and tires soon, and when I do, I'll be curious to see how that feels and if any adjustments to the fork will be necessary. As for my impressions on the performance, first thing I noticed was the fork does noticeably rise the stack height of the bike in unweighted form. Not only did I notice this just visually, but it did greatly and noticeably change the standover of the top tube compared to what I was used to in rigid form. Even with my weight on the bike and some compression due to the sag, it was still noticeably higher than it was in rigid form when I was riding. But this is a good thing as it gave room for the compression of the fork to do its job, allowing decent travel for those bigger hits, and it actually slackens out the geo a little bit for some trail descents. As for the steering sensation, one of the concerns I had, or at least things I was really interested to see, is if adding the additional weight of the suspension fork was going to in any way impact the crisp steering that this bike has always exhibited in rigid form. But to my pleasant surprise, I found that not to be the case. And while there certainly is a degradation in the sharpness of the steering, it wasn't too severe and it was greatly overshadowed by the performance of the fork, especially at higher speeds on uneven terrain. And it similarly did not make the bike feel front heavy. The bike was very balanced, carving corners at speed, and felt great when it did get into the air a little bit. The fork really does feel very supple and responsive without feeling springy, but it was harder to really quantify how well the fork absorbs those smaller high frequency vibrations, seeing that the large tire volume is obviously absorbing some of this as well. I did actually find it beneficial to run slightly higher tire pressure in the front tire than I normally would if I was running rigid, and this would allow the fork to do more of that work. Regarding the more aggressive terrain performance of the fork, on bigger impacts at higher speed or jumps, the bike felt great. It was very smooth and confidence inspiring on those types of things, and the bike tracked extremely well carrying through those larger events. So after having a chance to rail the bike at speed through a number of my more moderately aggressive Colorado single track trails, I think it's safe to say that the Mastodon Pro really does have a place in the dirt on a fat bike, especially for more aggressive high speed riding. And combining it with a dropper seat post, which I do have on this bike, it really did feel like it could steamroll through just about anything. And I even was unknowingly able to set some Strava PRs on a few trail segments that I've ridden a number of times on various bikes, including this same bike in rigid form. So to me, that demonstrates that the bike was really excelling on the performance end of the spectrum with the fork installed. As for the benefits in winter on a fat bike, I am an advocate for a dropper seat post on a fat bike in the winter, as it does have specific winter applications beyond just trail riding. But as for a suspension fork, I have not had a chance to ride it in the snow yet to really judge on that. But at this stage, I think my inclination is to still go rigid in the snow. I tend to think that the simplicity of the rigid fork and the lighter weight up front probably outweighs the benefit of suspension in snow riding. But I'd love to hear from you if you found any specific benefits to using suspension on your fat bike in the snow. Let me know in the comments below. So just to summarize, I can say I am now a fan of using suspension on fat bikes in the dirt, and I might even look to make it a more permanent staple for one of my fat bikes for summer riding in the future. If you have any more questions, comments, or experiences to add, drop those down in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, drop a like down below. It really helps out the channel. I have much more coming to the channel soon, including the newest fat bike that's about to hit the market, and including some fun rides and detailed product reviews. So subscribe now if you'd like to follow along and see any of that. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.